And so when a medical school is reviewing this, they're going, okay, right, great GPA. For DO schools, MCAT is maybe a little bit of a concern, not a huge concern. Let me really understand why she's doing this. Great experiences just from an activity list perspective. But when they read your story, they're not like, that's amazing. I want to talk to this person. Application Renovation, Season 2, Episode 4. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into your application and really hopefully help you figure out some strengths, some weaknesses in your application to hopefully make your next cycle successful. Before we dive into your application though, I want to hear from you, kind of your reflection on the application cycle, where you think your weaknesses are and why it hasn't been a successful cycle for you.
I believe that I may not have received any interviews this cycle because I had a lower MCAT, and I was currently residing in Georgia when I applied, and I applied entirely to Northeastern and Midwestern schools.
Okay.
Because that's where I want to end up in the long term.
Okay.
So just location and low MCAT.
Okay. All right. Did you get any interviews?
No.
Okay, no interviews. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at your application, really dive through the different experiences and everything you have on here to really give you an idea of how I see this and potentially how schools see this. And maybe at the end it's just an MCAT score, which is always good, but there's always good stuff to take away from it. All right, so we are looking at an AACOMAS application, which I think is the first time maybe we've looked at an AACOMAS application on here. So it's good to look at. So you did apply to DO schools, which I always recommend for the most part. And as we go through here, right, the first thing I see is your MCAT score is with this PDF. The 502 the second time you took it, the 499 the first time you took it. So a weaker MCAT score, not a horrible MCAT score. And for DO schools, actually, I think the average last time I looked was a 504 for matriculating medical students, so not too far below that. So maybe the MCAT score isn't the biggest issue, maybe not. So we'll see. But if we were to translate this over to your AACOMAS application, 502 definitely on the weaker side, still doable depending on stories and who you are as a person. What's interesting, that first MCAT score, that cars section, 129 to a 126, You're like, oh, if I got that 129 again, that would have been awesome. But that's all right. That's typically what happens, and maybe you did that as well, as students will go, oh, okay, I don't need to worry about cars for my retake, and then they didn't focus on it, and then their score drops because of it. So something to keep in mind. All right, and then as we go through this AACOMAS application, we see the schools that you attended and then the coursework for it, and so we get a good kind of look at your grades. And as we scroll through, I see lots of A's, which is really, really good. Right? We get some B pluses, how dare you, some B minuses, oh my God. So lots of great grades. Your GPA, not an issue, right? And so GPA and MCAT for a DO application is interesting. I'm surprised you didn't get more traction from DO schools, given your GPA is really solid, given your MCAT score is lower, but with the average MCAT score being a little bit lower for DO schools. I'm interested to look at the rest of your application and see maybe where we can improve for next time. And so I highlighted a few things on this application just for students to see how AACOMAS really lays out and really breaks down everything when it comes to GPA, the physics GPA, the biology GPA, chemistry GPA, just kind of everything. So your cumulative undergrad 377, science GPA 361, non-science 39. So great GPAs there. So good job with that.
Thank you.
Lots of MCAT score reporting that gets submitted with the AACOMAS application. And then we dive into the different activity sections. And so for students, just kind of a breakdown between AACOMAS and AACOMAS. The difference is AMCAS is limited to 15. AACOMAS isn't. It also breaks down things just a little bit differently when it comes to filling out the application. One of the biggest differences is there's no most meaningfuls, and the description box is only 600 characters compared to 700. So just kind of broad overview with my general thoughts on how an application should be put together. I very much want students to focus on stories, and 700 characters, 600 characters, still very easy to tell stories in that character count. All right, so as we look at this, the first thing we get to are extracurricular activities and getting some honors thesis, some research here, and the details of what comes here. I didn't really make any comments on this. I think it's very generic, especially for kind of thesis research. There's really not much to talk about. There's not a ton of stories to tell with that. The one thing actually that I will mark here is the very end here. You say, by the end of the research, the importance of empathic communication was clear through each participant's story, right? So it's a very common thing for students to want to say, I understand, right? I learned this. And that's what that statement is, right? I understand that you have to have empathic communication. Very generic, very true statement, but it really doesn't help me understand you a bunch. And so a lot of students will use each and every activity description to say, I learned, like based on this activity, I learned XYZ about being a physician. I learned XYZ about the medical field. I learned, in those types of statements, those types of takeaways, usually in my mind are wasted space where you can focus more on the story instead. And then we get into your integrity and leadership, volunteer experience. Again, great stuff. Nothing really big from the experience to talk about there. The listen officer, so you have some leadership stuff, which is great. Again, nothing huge to talk about description-wise. I think you did a good job potentially there. One thing, maybe as I think about it, looking through it, where I read here, you also sought to educate our peers by hosting an HIV/AIDS discussion moderated by a member of the CDC. Right? In those types of experiences, is there potential to tell a story instead of saying, hey, I educated people on HIV and AIDS or safe sex or whatever. Instead of telling me that, can you tell the story of you interacting with that person and maybe what that meant to them, what it meant to you? Getting more into that story. Extracurricular activity, you talked about knitting, which is great. I love having hobbies on there. It tells me who you are. And then I get to shadowing, which is great. So you have shadowing. It ended early, right? So you did it a while timeline-wise. If you look 2017 to 1/31/2019, not a ton of hours though, only 30 hours. And then I think it's fine how you did your description, just kind of listed things, not a ton of information that's needed there. So good job with that. Not a ton of shadowing hours as of yet, so hopefully maybe we'll see more. You do have a scribe experience, which for students who are lacking dedicated shadowing, being a scribe is usually considered really good kind of backup as well. I see the timeline here is only a couple months, 360 hours, but only a couple months. But I do remember that you do have some other scribe experience as well that has been ongoing. And you did list it out to June of 2020. So it shows the reviewer, oh, this is something that you're kind of actively doing, getting lots of experience. So tons of hours here as a scribe, which is great. Doing it for a long time, getting tons of exposure, right? So that's great. The one thing that you focused on here, again, potentially focusing on a story, like your most memorable patient that you remember, you decided to focus on some of the negativity of the experience, right? Despite its long hours and intensity, right? And so the question, somebody reading this, if this is a physician reading this, like, oh, you thought that was long hours and intensity? Just wait and see, right? So you got to be careful with some of that negativity. So good clinical experience, scribing, shadowing, non-healthcare employment as a chemistry teaching assistant, which is great. You focused a little bit on your accomplishments, right? You were voted the best TA in the chemistry department. The next semester, TA for biochemistry. It worked with new confidence in your abilities and deeper appreciation for the content, right? Again, focusing on story, maybe there's an opportunity to tell a story of you interacting with one of the students, maybe a student coming to you who just really, really struggled, and you were able to help him or her overcome those struggles.
Okay.
Student tutor. So obviously, just those two things, right? Being a TA, being a tutor, I can take away without you needing to spell it out or sell it in the description. I can take away that you were probably a decent communicator. You're probably decent at communicating those ideas to people and interacting with people, maybe a little bit of leadership there as well, just because of those experiences and what you were doing. Okay. Honors program mentor, the biology lab coordinator. So good jobs to have. So lots of various experiences that you've had, which is great. The awards section. So again, for AACOMAS, just they have a different awards and achievements section of their application where you can put some stuff in. So you did some good stuff there. All right, and then we get to your personal statement, which is potentially where I think the majority of where we can stand out a little bit more or better next time, and really telling your story as to why you want to be a physician. So remember, students, I've talked to students with 3.9 GPAs and 520 Mcat scores with 0 interviews, right? In the same boat as you, stats just outstanding, stellar, but 0 interviews for very similar reasons because of the lack of ability to tell their story as to why they want to be a physician. So we'll dive into your personal statement here. So you start off telling a story, which is great. I stand in the corner of the room, the respiratory therapist bags the patient. Just kind of a style thing that I prefer, and it's not like a general rule of thumb or anything. But when I read a personal statement, I like to read past tense, right? And when I read present tense in a personal statement, it just sounds weird to me, and it's just harder for me to read. But past tense seems to make more sense. So just a random kind of side thought there. We have this theme over the first couple episodes of season 2 of death being written about. Students like to talk about death for some reason. Like, I know that I'm not going to be able to save everyone as a physician, so I'm going to talk about that. And so you have that. Working as a scribe in the emergency department for the last 3 years, I was no stranger to the various challenges and successes in medicine. So the personal statement is, why do you want to be a physician? Not, I know that in medicine there are challenges and successes. Mm-hmm. Okay? So the story. What is the story that shows me why you want to be a physician? So I need the story, and I need the reflection as to why this is motivating you. Okay? And then you get into talking about some of those challenges. So you say some of these challenges involve watching patients die from cardiac arrest. Again, this focus on death. Students love talking about death. Respiratory failure, brain death, etc. You get into patient's death remains constant as my heart breaks for the family and loved ones of the patients. There was just something about that line that I don't know why I highlighted it. It was just something that there was something off about it as I read it. And I don't remember what it is at this moment. It doesn't stand out as a terrible thing as of right now, but I highlighted it, so I brought it up. So again, students is a very, 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 very common theme in personal statements that students like to talk about, is this dichotomy, life and death. And again, I don't know why it's brought up. It's just something that students like to talk about. It's overused. It doesn't help a reviewer understand why you want to be a physician, right? I think 1,000% of human beings understand that we live and then we die. you don't need to be a physician to do that, to understand that. And so a lot of your discussion is around that dichotomy of what you're experiencing, right? You say here, I have also witnessed incredible moments where the physician I was working with had profound impact on the patient's life, or ensuring that the patient's physical and emotional needs are met. I'm left with the question again, why did this impact you? Tell me a specific story, not generally what you've experienced, but a specific story, and focus on why that made you want to be a physician. Okay? All right, we get into the seed, as I like to call it in my book, the seed. I became interested in the healthcare field after my childhood best friend's brother lost a 10-year battle to brain cancer. Great. I mean, not great, sad, but you're getting your seed. Here is where I first became interested in healthcare. I wrote here, I highlighted it in red, even though I love to see the seed, because you're telling me, right? If you could show me, what did that look like, right? Oh, like seeing your best friend come to you, like devastated that their brother died or was dying of brain cancer. Show that experience, and that would be a better way to bring this up, more memorable way. It's great that you have it there. I love to see it. It could be better by showing it. Okay. You go on to talk about that experience and what that was like for you, which is great. I like this last sentence here, the reflection. Rather than feeling hopeless and angry, I decided to turn my sadness into determination. I aspire to be a doctor that cares for families during times of helplessness, fear, and sorrow, and to be there for those who lose a loved one. Right? So great job reflecting on that experience and why that made you want to be a physician. So good job with that one. Okay? And then you get into a little bit of kind of timeline, a little bit of resume stuff, right? During my undergraduate studies, I had the opportunity to scribe and shadow in other specialties, including an orthopedic surgeon and pediatric cardiologist. Yep, that's in your activity list. You don't need to tell me that in your personal statement, right? While observing surgeries, I watched each precise maneuver of the surgeon's hands. Students love to describe how amazing physicians are, and it doesn't really help me understand, again, why you want to be a physician. So try to stay away from that kind of stuff. You talked about being drawn to the newborn babies in the nursery, placing the stethoscope over the chest of an infant. You got to hear that rapid heartbeat. Again, there's no reflection, right? Why did that experience make you want to be a physician? And don't talk generally, right? I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do this, that was awesome. Say, there was this one patient who I listened to, right? And really tell that story and focus in, again, on why that made you want to be a physician. Teamwork, again, is super, super common for students to focus on in a personal statement, right? The teamwork that is involved in healthcare with nurses and doctors and physical therapists and social workers and everything, students really focus on, and it's overplayed. It doesn't, again, help me understand why you want to be a physician. It's more coming from the angle of that you understand that there's teamwork involved in healthcare. Great. Doesn't help me. You get into a little bit of a sales pitch here, focusing on effective and ethical leadership and saying, hey, it's something that I'm good at. And then you get into one of your extracurricular activities to show how you've honed that skill. The personal statement isn't there to say, hey, I'm an effective leader. I know that healthcare, right? If I were to paraphrase this paragraph is saying, I understand that healthcare is a team sport. The physician is the leader of that team. I have leadership skills that I have honed because of these experiences, right? It's one big giant sales pitch to say, I understand, I have the skills, I'm going to be great. The personal statement is, why do you want to be a physician? Not that you think you're going to be a good one. Okay? So again, kind of getting to this point, right? The story about why you want to be a physician is missing. You have a great seed, right? I'm glad that's there. And it sounds like you have amazing experiences to draw from being a scribe for so long. Where I think you detoured in the wrong way is that you focused on the wrong things when telling your story. And instead of saying, here's why I want to be a physician, you said, here's the start of my journey, and here's where I'm going to be a good physician. Okay? And so when a medical school is reviewing this, they're going, okay, right, great GPA. For DO schools, MCAT is maybe a little bit of a concern, not a huge concern. Let me really understand why she's doing this. Great experiences just from an activity list perspective. But when they read your story, they're not like, that's amazing, I want to talk to this person. It's, okay, it's another student who thinks they're ready to be a doctor and they're going to be an amazing leader. Mm-hmm. Got it? And so the rest of the AMCAS application is just some letters of evaluation things, just for students to kind of see the rest of this, and some final sign-offs. So I think potentially, and actually just one other thing, how many DO schools did you apply to?
I applied to 4 DOs and 9 MDs.
Okay. I just saw the one designation on here, so maybe this was printed with just the one before.
It was.
Okay. So in my mind, right, I think you should have been competitive for a DO school if you would have told your story a little bit better, right? And that's why we do this application renovation. That's why I do the podcast and write the books on storytelling, because it's so important. It's why I'm wearing this shirt. Your story matters. And I think if we could have done a better job telling that story, you would have gotten more traction with people interested in who you are.
Okay.
Questions?
I was going to retake the MCAT in April.
Okay.
Do you think that is still worth doing?
Yes.
Or is okay.
Yeah, so a 502 I would definitely retake. It's not something that I would kind of rest your laurels on. Obviously, the goal is to be as competitive as possible for every medical school, and so a higher MCAT score will help with that. Okay.
So mainly MCAT and then real-time personal statement.
Yes, exactly. Just figuring out how to tell that story a little bit better. And just because a lot of students who are going to watch this are going to be in a very similar boat and trying to figure out next steps, a lot of students will take this rejected application and go, oh, I'm going to do an SMP. I'm going to do a master's program. And my response to that is absolutely not. The goal of a master's program or an SMP or any sort of postbac is to prove yourself academically. You've done that already. You need to prove yourself maybe a little bit more MCAT-wise, but that's silly, right? The MCAT's just to see how good you are at taking the MCAT. But from an overall perspective, you don't need a master's program at all. And students in similar situations with really strong GPAs don't need a master's program. You just need to do better on the MCAT and tell your story a little bit better.
I was advised to look into a master's for this next year.
Of course you
I
are.
apply again.
Yeah.
And I was like, financially, I can't do it,
Yeah.
and I don't see the point because
There's no point. And so that's part of my frustration with kind of the academic world is that the academic world will try to keep you in the academic world and say, oh, just do a master's, right? It's just more debt. What is it in the grand scheme of things? So always take that advice with a little grain of salt.
Okay.
All right. I hope this was helpful for you and will really set yourself up for success moving forward and really get you into medical school. So please keep us updated on your progress in the future.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.